Hello, you sentient ball of stardust. My name is Casey Davis. I'm a therapist and I'm an author of the book How to Keep House While Drowning, where I talk about ways to make it a little bit easier to take care of yourself when you're overwhelmed, stressed, have mental health issues, physical health issues, or maybe you're just in a hard season of life. Maybe you're looking for a place that you can come and listen to some practical advice. This is a podcast for all of the self-help rejects. We're going to talk about skills for survival and self-kindness. And I'm going to leave the pop psychology at the door. I promise not to tell you to meditate or to journal. We're just going to give you some really insightful conversations with hopefully some practical advice. So I don't believe you need to pick yourself up by the bootstraps. I don't want you to just try harder, and I don't believe that laziness exists. So join me over on Struggle Care, where we can find compassionate solutions that help us function a little bit better.
Are you struggling to conceive? You have options, and at Piedmont Reproductive Endocrinology Group, we'll make sure you have the guidance and support you need. PREG is known for individualized fertility care that's unique to every patient. We take the time to provide a reassuring and empowering experience because we believe that you deserve nothing less. Let us help you on your journey to parenthood. Visit us at pregonline.com to learn more. Get the guidance and support you need at Piedmont Reproductive Endocrinology Group.
Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.
Hi guys, how's it going? My name's Elena Grace, and welcome to I've Been Thinking. This week is not a book club, although you might have kind of thought it was based on some of my posts on Instagram. But I tried really hard to make sure you knew what was going on. This week, we are talking about a real life situation that is very reminiscent to an iconic book. So, I'm not trying to get you guys to read Lord of the Flies. I mean, hell, I've not read it myself. It's iconic, though. I think that a lot of schools have it as required reading. So, most people have read it at some point or another. My teachers in high school loved classic literature. So I read a lot of Shakespeare, some Dostoevsky, Mary Shelley. So I guess that's how I avoided it. I don't really know. Maybe they just didn't like it. I don't remember if they ever addressed that. But anyway, long story short, the book itself is about a group of kids. They survive a plane crash, little British boys. They survive a plane crash, but they're the only ones who do. None of the adults make it. So they're stuck on this deserted island alone, and they institute a bit of a democracy, but that quickly falls apart. And basically, the boys quickly turn into little savages. They throw off their clothes, they paint their faces, they ignore the only 3 rules that their democratically elected leader had given them. And by the time they're found by a British Royal Navy captain, 3 of the boys are dead, and little Ralph weeps for the end of his innocence and the innate darkness in the soul of man. It's not a real story, though. The one we read about in school is a piece of fiction written by a British schoolmaster, William Golding, in 1951. He actually based some of the characters off boys at his school, which, if you think about it, should be a little bit concerning. But more importantly, I guess the book brought about this line of questioning amongst the young people at the time, and even continuing on later. But at the time, it brought about this question of, was the Second World War an anomaly, or could any of us be that evil? So Lord of the Flies inspired the TV show Survivor even. And you can see hints of the themes echoed across all of pop culture. Last week, I just watched an episode of Criminal Minds where, very long story short, 3 guys turn on each other in a very high-stress situation really quickly. And one ends up dead. Actually, I think 2 end up dead. Anyway, one of them is totally innocent until he gets dragged in kind of last minute. And then he ends up being the one to kill 2 people. One of the guys ends up dead, and then they have another. Anyway, this guy that gets dragged in at the end ends up being the one to kill 2 people. So these themes of innate darkness and high stress situations, bringing that out, like I said, echo all across popular culture. Rutger Bregman, a journalist for The Guardian, was super inspired by Lord of the Flies. And he wondered what would really happen if this were to occur in real life, right? Like I said, we see it all over in this book and other things that have similar themes. But what if it happened in real life? So he did some digging and he found out that it did happen in real life in the 1960s. Now, I highly encourage you to go read the article for yourselves because, frankly, I'm not going to read the whole thing to you here, and I don't want to be accused of using his work as my own. But the story is incredible. Essentially, a young man, Captain Peter Warner, was sailing one of his own boats from Tasmania, where he kept a fleet to satisfy his need for the sea, back to Australia, where he worked as an accountant for his dad's electronics company. He took a bit of a detour, probably to make the trip last longer, if I had to guess, because I have a feeling Peter and I might be cut from the same cloth. And he noticed burnt patches on an island that had been completely deserted since slave traders stripped it of its inhabitants in the mid-1800s. And this struck him as odd because random fires like that aren't common in the tropics. So I'd say he had already made the decision to swing over to the island to have a look around. But right about then, a naked boy with shoulder-length hair, looking like a wild man, literally leapt off a cliff and began swimming towards him. And then more boys followed, and they shouted out in perfect English to tell them that they were stuck on the island. What he found upon pulling the boys on board his ship was that they were bored at their boarding school. It's a lot of board. They were bored at their boarding school one day, and they had decided to come up with an escape plan. And they were going to, quote-unquote, borrow a boat from this man that none of them really liked. And they hoped to sail it to Fiji or maybe even to New Zealand. This was all in Australia. They had not accounted for food or a map or a compass or a sudden storm that would leave them adrift at sea for days until they eventually landed on the small abandoned island where they would make a home for themselves for about 15 months. So during this time, the boys essentially created a commune, but in the best way, not in a weird way. On the boat, they equitably distributed rainwater that they collected in hollowed out coconut shells. On the island, they had turned what was considered a cursed and uninhabitable island into gardens and badminton courts and even a kind of rudimentary gymnasium. They had chicken pens and they had hollowed out tree trunks to store rainwater in, so they always had fresh water. And they had a fire that burned continuously for over a year. They had timeouts whenever they fought, and they began every day with song and prayer together. When one slipped and broke his leg, they reset it so well that it healed perfectly. The point of this is that they didn't rebel and freaking kill each other just because they were frustrated or tired or hot or annoyed. They didn't kill each other. They worked together. And this goes against everything that the Lord of the Flies teaches us then. That we are all inherently evil, that the right circumstances will turn any of us into a cold-blooded killer or even the next Hitler. The zeitgeist that was created by Lord of the Flies was important, I think. Questioning ourselves, wondering who we are and what we're capable of. Because that's an important discussion to have with yourself. It was a very Rousseau philosopher-esque moment where we were forced to do some deep soul-searching, you know? And perhaps that was a bit the original motivation behind making it required reading in so many schools. Maybe. I'd like to think that it wasn't trying to brainwash children into thinking that they would rebel and kill each other if they were left to their own devices. But my experience is that, in general, the human soul and the human mind is so much kinder than we typically attribute to it. It's easy to be mean a lot of the time, which seems like it would disprove my argument, but being kind makes you feel good. It literally releases good chemicals in your brain. And being mean doesn't do the same thing for most of us that kindness does. And yes, people often suffer from selfishness, but like I always say, a little selfishness is healthy, you know? The difference comes when you're being selfish at the expense of others. Like I talked about last week, where individualism puts others at risk in terms of wearing a mask or hoarding resources, maybe. When we come together as a community, though, and recognize that working together gets us way farther than working against one another, like these boys did to survive, that's where we have success, I suppose. So take a minute today and go learn about those 6 boys who disproved the Lord of the Flies. The real boys who fell into obscurity in spite of their courageous and remarkable acts of survival, in favor of tales of bitterness and the loss of innocence. We need to remember them and learn from them, that individuals holding and sharing responsibilities, working together for the good of humanity and the good of community, can achieve things beyond our expectations. Y'all, I really hope you've enjoyed this short little episode today. It was really fun for me. I loved learning about this and loved putting this little write-up together. Please follow us on Instagram at I've Been Thinking Pod and comment on today's post what you thought. Subscribe wherever you listen, and if you use Apple, please leave us a 5-star rating and type up a review and let me know what you personally think about this podcast. Thanks so much again, everybody. Thank you for listening. I'll talk at you next week, guys. Bye.
Hello, you sentient ball of stardust. My name is Casey Davis. I'm a therapist, and I'm an author of the book How to Keep House While Drowning, where I talk about ways to make it a little bit easier to take care of yourself when you're overwhelmed, stressed, have mental health issues, physical health issues, or maybe you're just in a hard season of life. Maybe you're looking for a place that you can come and listen to some practical advice. This is a podcast for all of the self-help rejects. We're going to talk about skills for survival and self-kindness. And I'm going to leave the pop psychology at the door. I promise not to tell you to meditate or to journal. We're just going to give you some really insightful conversations with hopefully some practical advice. So I don't believe you need to pick yourself up by the bootstraps. I don't want you to just try harder, and I don't believe that laziness exists. So join me over on Struggle Care, where we can find compassionate solutions that help us function a little bit better.
New on CuriosityStream.
I'm James Burke. I'm going to take you on a journey through time.
James Burke's visionary series returns, reimagined for our time.
Now, this is all uncharted territory.
The Washington Post hails Burke as one of the most intriguing minds in the Western world. The New York Times raves he careens from one great moment in history to another.
Where do we want to go from here?
Experience all new connections.
So what's the next connection?
With monthly, annual, and bundled plans, find the one that works for you at CuriosityStream.com.